Hello and welcome back to Jekyll and Hyde Annotates with me. We are now on the fourth chapter, which is the Carew murder case. This is quite a short chapter, but it has so much in terms of context that we need to analyse. For those of you who are aiming for the grades 7s, 8s and 9s, I'm going to go into a lot of detail about some of the key quotations that you should be remembering for the exam. So stay tuned for that. I'm going to be exploring lots and lots of contextual ideas and Stevenson's own ideas, as well as the way that the Victorian readership would have reacted to some of the incidents that happen within this text. So let's get started straight away. Nearly a year later, in the month of October 18, London was startled by a crime of singular ferocity and rendered all the more notable by the high position of the victim. So a year later, after following the previous chapter, something else happened that left the whole of London feeling really worried, anxious and uneasy. The details were few and startling. A maid servant living alone in a house not far from the river had gone upstairs to bed about 11. Although a fog rolled over the city in the small hours, the early part of the night was cloudless, and the lane which the maid's window overlooked was brilliantly lit by the full moon. So we've got the imagery of the fog again. Remember, this is something that follows through the entire novel, but we get the impression that it's not very strong in this instance, and it's really important because the fog grows thicker later on when Utterson goes to visit Hyde. So this fog creates mystery and links to the theme of secrecy. Remember that we've already explored the importance of the fog in the previous video, so please watch the previous video on our analysis of the fog and what it symbolizes if you'd like to know more about that. We've also got the use of juxtaposing imagery here about in terms of the way the weather is described, to show how this incident is very different to the last. So we've got the fog, but then we've got how the early part of the night was cloudless, and the lane which the maid's window overlooked was brilliantly lit by the full moon. So we get the impression almost like it's daylight when it's not. It's actually nighttime, but it's almost daylight. Okay, so it's early in the evening, you could say. So whilst the last incident occurred in the late hours of the night, so very early in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, this incident, although it happens in at the night time, it's almost as if it happens in broad daylight because of how cloudless the sky is and how brilliantly bright the full moon is, which makes it all the more disturbing, because it's darkness obviously has connotations of mystery and chaos and things going wrong, but a brightly lit sky, even though it's nighttime, lit by a brightly lit moon, is a very different image. It's suggesting or symbolizing hope. It seems she was romantically given, for she sat down upon her box, which stood immediately under the window, and fell into a dream of musing. Never, she used to say with streaming tears when she narrated that experience, never had she felt more at peace with all men or thought more kindly of the world. So we've got here in this short passage that I've just read the semantic field of innocence and purity used when describing the character and the way she reacts to what happened or how she felt before the incident, which makes her tale more impactful and empathy inducing. She's painted as someone who is hyperbolically angelic, so clearly a victim and somebody who we feel empathetic towards. And as she so sat, she became aware of an aged and beautiful man with white hair drawing near along the lane, and advancing to meet him another and very small gentleman to whom at first she paid less attention. So this is a really key quotation. You might want to make note of this particular key quotation here on a notebook if you're collecting the quotations as we're exploring the text in this Annotate with Me series. We've got the description of the man here as beautiful gentleman, which is a direct contrast between Hyde's savage and detestable appearance that we've already explored before, and the man's handsome appearance, making the reader feel inclined to side with the man, so to feel biased and feel sorry for the man when we find out what the incident is. When they had come within speech, which was just under the maid's eyes, the older man bowed and accosted to the other with a very pretty manner of politeness. It did not seem as if the subject of his address were of great importance. Indeed, from his pointing, it sometimes appeared as if he were only inquiring his way. But the moon shone on his face as he spoke, and the girl was pleased to watch it. It seemed to breathe such an innocent and old-world kindness of disposition, yet with something high too, as of well-founded self-content. So we've got further description to exaggerate the divinity of this particular man that's being described here, just like the little girl in the first account. So the account that Enfield gave about the trampling of the girl, this old gentleman, with the symbolic heavenly light around him and his divine appearance, is also a figure of innocence. So another thing to note as well is that this description that the maid gives is very, very precise. So she's able to describe it in a lot of detail, which is really important because later when she describes Hyde, we find it's very different. Presently her eye wandered to the other, and she was surprised to recognise in him a certain Mr. Hyde, who had once visited her master and for whom she had conceived a dislike. He had in his hand a heavy cane. So she said she conceived a dislike, but she doesn't really go into detail. Notice how before she was very precise about this man, but here she just says she doesn't like Hyde. She didn't like him. Just looking at him made her dislike him, but there's no precise description. He had in his hand a heavy cane, with which he was trifling, but he answered never a word, and seemed to listen with an ill-contained impatience. So the description of the man and the immediate proximity of the description of Hyde creates a deeper contrast with Hyde's wickedness. So Hyde's description is very vague, which again links to the themes of hypocrisy that we've previously discussed. So if you are following along with me, you'll know exactly what I mean, but if you haven't watched the previous videos, then I'd encourage you to watch them, because all of the things that we cover in the videos will link to the videos that we've previously done. And then all of a sudden he broke out in a great flame of anger, stamping with his foot, brandishing the cane, and carrying on, as the maid described it, like a madman. So stamping with his foot almost makes him look like sound like a savage. So again, dehumanizing him, making Hyde seem inhuman, which again we've discussed, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. Arguably, though, at this point in the novel, you could say that the two men, so Hyde and the man who we later find out to be Sir Danvers Carew, represent the opposing sides of the human personality. So we've got the theme of the duality of man. Hyde here is an uncontrollable fury. So the innocent old man with his well-founded self-content seems to have provoked him into this state. So a question I'd like to ask you, and I'd like you to answer in the comments below if you can, is how do you think that such an innocent old man could invoke such uncontrollable fury? What could have been done? What could have been said? What is Stevenson trying to suggest here? What do you think? What is your opinion? Remember, for the top level grades, you do need to incorporate some of your own opinions. So this is a really good way of doing that. So if you can pop a comment in the comment section below, that'd be really good. I'd love to see what you think. The old gentleman took a step back with the air of one very much surprised and a trifle hurt, and at that Mr. Hyde broke out of all bounds and clubbed him to the earth. So clubbed him, literally battered him, which shows again how violent Hyde is, his savage nature. And next moment, with ape-like fury, he was trampling with his victim underfoot and hailing down a storm of blows under which the bones were audibly shattered and the body jumped upon the roadway. At the horror of these sights and sounds, the maid fainted. So there's so much to unpack here. This is a really, really key quotation. Please make a note of it in your notebook if you are making notes of key quotations. It's very, very, very key. I'm going to go into a lot of detail about this particular quotation because there's lots to link it to context. Okay, so those of you who are aiming for grades 8s and 9s, please listen carefully because this is really important information. So this links to context because in 1859, Charles Darwin, in The Origin of Species, had thrust into the Victorian consciousness his unpalatable theory that mankind was in fact descended from apes. So it links to Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, and he it became something really, really evident within the Victorian consciousness, and something that people became quite obsessed about at the time Stevenson was writing. Stevenson would have been well aware of the controversy which grew from these ideas, and sought a vehicle in which to launch his ideas about the beast in man, and the attempt to hide, if not to subdue, animal passions. So this gave Stevenson an idea to explore his own ideas about the beast in man, the fact that everybody has a beast within them. In Stevenson's words, the novel is about that damned old business of the war and the members, and because of the strictures of religion and conventional ideas of morality, men were forced to hide their secret desires in their public lives and indulge in them at night in the darker, seedier parts of the city. So this theme of secrecy is presented here. If you explore context in this way, you can then link it to themes. So Stevenson believed that because of the constraining natures of religion and society in general and their ideas of morality, people who had these hidden traits, and he believed everybody had these hidden traits, had to do them secretly, so had to indulge in them secretly. Those who were especially prey to these animal passions were men who believed that they could exist perfectly well without the aid of women. Men like the main characters in this novel, for example, Enfield. So we need to question where exactly had he been at 3 a.m. when he saw Hyde trampling over the girl. Men also like Utterson, Lanyon and Jekyll. So I've already spoken about bachelorhood and what this shows about the novel, and what we've already explored that in the previous section, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about this, but it is important to note that Stevenson believed that these particular men, these bachelors, were especially prey to these animal passions because they didn't have a romantic relationship with a woman. Notice also the repeated references, and we'll see these references later, but we've already seen them when Utterson pulls out Jekyll's will, but also the title of the first chapter, The Story of the Door. Notice also the repeated references to locked doors and cabinets and secret chambers, reinforcing the idea that the beast must not only be hidden, but imprisoned as well. Later on in this extract, we have got these really, really vivid, the use of violent and vivid imagery. So the silence, this is one of the most horrific, this is one of the most horrific passages in the entire novel. And so we've got, the way the bones were audibly shattered. We've also got the fact that the victim underfoot and hailing down a storm of blows, and how the body jumped upon the roadway. So lots and lots of imagery. Later on, we're given the description of how the body was mangled, and the object that was used, the stick that was used to batter this man, was very tough and heavy wood. So this is one of the most horrific passages in the entire novel, and Stevenson doesn't spare the reader the gruesome details. This gruesome imagery would have been really shocking to the Victorian reader, and it certainly manages to disturb us as well. Notice as well how the silence between the first crime and the second is a mysterious gulf in time. A whole year has passed in this time secretly, and secretly Mr. Hyde has somehow become an even stronger force. There is a similarity, though, between the two accounts, each one involving a markedly innocent figure, first a child and now this beautiful elderly man. So let's continue to read. It was 2 o'clock when she came to herself and called for the police. The murderer was gone long ago, but there lay his victim in the middle of the lane, incredibly mangled. So the gruesome details and gruesome imagery used here. The stick with which the deed had been done, although it was of some rare and very tough and heavy wood, had broken in the middle under the stress of this insensate cruelty. So this, even though this stick was so heavy and so well made and of such good quality, it had actually broken in two because of how viciously Hyde had battered Sir Danvers Carew, and one splintered half had rolled in the neighbouring gutter. The other, without doubt, had been carried away by the murderer. A purse and a gold watch were found upon the victim, but no cards or papers except a sealed and stamped envelope, which he had been probably carrying to the post, and which bore the name and address of Mr. Utterson. So this Sir Danvers Carew was carrying a letter addressed to Utterson. Nothing had gone missing, so this wasn't an attack so that somebody could rob this man, or this was an attack of some other sort, which again creates a really mysterious, ominous setting. This was brought to the lawyer the next morning before he was out of bed, and he had no sooner seen it and been told the circumstances than he shot out a solemn lip. "I shall say nothing till I have seen the body," said he. "This may be very serious. Have the kindness to wait while I dress." And with the same grave countenance he hurried through his breakfast and drove to the police station, whither the body had been carried. As soon as he came into the cell he nodded. "Yes," said he, "I recognise him. I am sorry to say that this is Sir Danvers Carew." "Good God, sir!" exclaimed the officer. "Is it possible?" So the officer is clearly really shocked here, and the next moment his eye lighted up with professional ambition. There's some really, really key quotations throughout this chapter about the minor characters, and it's important, especially for those of you who are aiming for grades 8s and 9s, to notice the interactions and the way these minor characters are described. So look at the behaviour of some of the minor characters in response to the murder. Once again, the contradiction in the human personality are explored. So he's shocked at first. The shock of the police officer when the body is revealed as that of Sir Danvers Carew is immediately juxtaposed by his thought of professional ambition. So the fact that maybe he can gain more of a better reputation in the police force if he indulges in this particular case and takes care of this case. So he's just thinking about his own professional ladder, how to climb up it. "This will make a deal of noise," he said, "and perhaps you can help us to the man." And he briefly narrated what the maid had seen and showed the broken stick. Mr. Utterson had already quailed at the name of Hyde, but when the stick was laid before him he could doubt no longer. Broken and battered as it was, he recognised it for one that he had himself presented many years before to Henry Jekyll. "Is this Mr. Hyde a person of small stature?" he inquired. "Particularly small and particularly wicked-looking is what the maid calls him," said the officer. Mr. Utterson reflected, and then raising his head, "If you will come with me in my cab," he said, "I think I can take you to his house." So now they're on the police officer and Utterson are on the way to Hyde's house. It was by this time about 9 in the morning, and the first fog of the season. A great chocolate-coloured pall lowered over heaven, but the wind was continually charging and rooting these embattled vapours, so that the cab crawled from street to street. We see lots of clever use of personification throughout this to personify the fog and the weather, but one of the things that I want to mention again is the fog. So Stevenson here is building up a world of symbols that denote the appearance of Hyde and the approach of evil, so the fog is symbolic of the evil. Foggy weather and strange light is a sign of the obscure and masked nature of the events. But they are also constantly transforming, creating a new landscape with each glance, making the atmosphere unpredictable. The description of Hyde's looks, with the phrases wicked-looking, devilish and deformed, recurring in each account, follows him like a symbol too, almost like a fog. So all of the same descriptions are given about Hyde, how he is devilish, how he's wicked-looking, how he's deformed. The obscuring weather embodies the secrecy and repression that is haunting these streets. The way that Hyde's house appears from the rest gives a fated, ominous sense to Utterson's journey, given Hyde's ability to inspire hatred in others. It is unclear if the old woman... So later on, we're going to see a description of a old woman, and she's another minor character when he arrives at... when Utterson arrives at Hyde's house. So we need to decide when we meet this old woman whether she's naturally wicked or if her exposure to Hyde has made her wicked. Mr. Utterson beheld a marvellous number of degrees and hues of twilight, for here it would be dark like the black back end of evening, and there would be a glow of a rich, lurid brown, like the light of some strange conflagration, and here for a moment the fog would be quite broken up, and a haggard shaft of daylight would glance in between the swirling wreaths. The dismal quarter of Soho, seen under these changing glimpses, with its muddy ways and slatternly passengers, and its lamps which had never been extinguished or had been kindled afresh to combat this mournful reinvasion of darkness, seemed in the lawyer's eyes like a district of some city in a nightmare. So this city of Soho is really, really described as extremely disadvantaged, but because of its poverty-stricken nature, or because of the type of people that live there, it's described as really, really dark and ominous and scary, and almost like evil lurks within it. The thoughts of his mind, besides, were of the gloomiest dye, and when he glanced at the companion of his drive, he was conscious of some touch of that terror of the law and the law's officers, which may at times assail the most honest. So he's saying here, he's speaking about how he's in the car with the police officer, and how the police officer himself is really filled with horror at the sight of this particular city. As the cab drew up before the address indicated, the fog lifted a little and showed him a dingy street, a gin palace, a low French eating house, a shop for the retail of penny numbers and two-penny salads, many ragged children huddled in the doorways, and many women of different nationalities passing out, key in hand, to have a morning glass. And the next moment the fog settled down again upon that part as brown as umber, and cut him off from his blackguardly surroundings. This was the home of Henry Jekyll's favourite, of a man who was heir to £250,000 sterling. So they've arrived at the home of Hyde. An ivory-faced and silvery-haired old woman opened the door. She had an evil face, smoothed by hypocrisy, but her manners were excellent. So remember earlier I told you to notice how the minor characters are presented. So like the police officer who we discussed earlier, this old lady is an example of what Jekyll will later describe as his theory of the duality of man, that everyone has both good and evil in them. She is both joyful and devious in appearance, reminding us of the immediate effect of Hyde's evil look. And this dubious welcome is again contrasted with the pleasant atmosphere of Hyde's rooms, now that we're going to get this description. So we've got this reference to the duality of man, or Stevenson's the beast in man, how everybody has something evil in them. Nobody is fully good. And this theme is explored even through the minor characters. Yes, she said, this was Mr. Hyde, but he was not at home. He had been in that night very late, but had gone away again in less than an hour. There was nothing strange in that. His habits were very irregular, and he was often absent. For instance, it was nearly 2 months since she had seen him till yesterday. Very well, then, we wish to see his rooms, said the lawyer, and when the woman began to declare it was impossible, I had better tell you who this person is, he added. This is Inspector Newcomen of Scotland Yard. So Utterson introduces the policeman, and notice her reaction to this. A flash of odious joy appeared upon the woman's face. So although we can understand why she might want the terrible Mr. Hyde to come to harm, we get the clear impression that she would generally delight in the misfortune of others. So I'd like to ask you another question, and I'd like you to answer in the comments if you can. What do all of these contradictory images of the minor characters tell us about Stevenson's views of human nature? What does Stevenson think about human nature? Can you answer that question for me in the comments, please? That'd be really great. I'd love to hear your responses, and remember, it is your own interpretations and opinions that award you the highest marks. It's a highly, highly awarded skill to be critical, to be analytical, to say things from your own point of view. Ah, said she. He is in trouble. What has he done? Mr. Utterson and the inspector exchanged glances. You don't seem a very popular character, observed the latter. And now, my good woman, just let me and this gentleman have a look about us. In the whole extent of the house, which, but for the old woman, remained otherwise empty, Mr. Hyde had only used a couple of rooms, but these were furnished with luxury and good taste. A closet was filled with wine, the plate was of silver, the napery elegant, a good picture hung upon the walls, a gift, as Utterson supposed, from Henry Jekyll, who was much of a connoisseur, and the carpets were of many plies and agreeable in colour. At this moment, however, the room... So we've got the description here of a house that is almost furnished by Jekyll. So it's the type of furniture that Utterson immediately associates with Jekyll, because it's tasteful, it is luxurious, it's well presented. And then we've got this juxtaposition here. At this moment, however, the rooms bore every mark of having been recently and hurriedly ransacked. Clothes lay about the floor, with their pockets inside out. Lock-fast drawers stood open, and on the hearth there lay a pile of grey ashes, as though many papers had been burned. So then we've got this juxtaposing imagery of a chaotic, really messy environment. So almost again mimicking or symbolizing the duality of man, the two sides of man. From these embers, the inspector interred the butt end of a green checkbook, which had resisted the action of the fire. The other half of the stick was found behind the door, and as this clinched his suspicion, the officer declared himself delighted. A visit to the bank, where several £1,000s were found to be lying to the murderer's credit, completed his gratification. "You may depend upon it, sir," he told Utterson. "I have him in my hand. He must have lost his head, or he never would have left the stick, or above all burned the cheque-book. Why, money's life to the man. We have nothing to do but wait for him at the bank and get out the handbills." This last, however, was not so easy of accomplishment, for Mr. Hyde had numbered few familiars. Even the master of the servants' maid had only seen him twice. His family could nowhere be traced. He had never been photographed, and the few who could describe him differed widely, as common observers will. Only one point were they agreed, and that was the haunting sense of unexpressed deformity with which the fugitive impressed his beholders. So just when it seems that Hyde can be explained using a rational approach, and might be caught out by his attachment to a bank account or, the checkbook or the stick that he left behind, he becomes a ghost again. His characteristics are unusual and indescribable at the end again, or making him really, really ominous, but also really obscure and hard to pin down. Okay, so that's the end of this particular chapter. Thank you so much if you have joined me to the end. If you haven't already, then please remember to comment on the questions that I've asked, to like this video if you found it helpful, and to subscribe to our channel, because we'll have lots and lots of great content coming up, especially lots of material on how to revise for Jekyll and Hyde closer to the exam period. Thank you. Bye.